Remember to check out my Patreon page for full audiobooks and loads more extra content. Remember, there's always time for another story. Chapter 69. Annabeth. Getting killed by Tartarus didn't seem like much of an honour. As Annabeth stared up at his dark whirlpool face, she decided she'd rather die in some less memorable way, maybe falling down the stairs or going peacefully in her sleep at age 80, after a nice quiet life with Percy. Yes, that sounded good. It wasn't the first time Annabeth had faced an enemy she couldn't defeat by force. Normally, this would have been her cue to stall for time with some clever Athena-like chit-chat. Except her voice wouldn't work. She couldn't even close her mouth. For all she knew, she was drooling as badly as Percy did when he slept. She was dimly aware of the army of monsters swirling around her, but after their initial roar of triumph, the horde had fallen silent. Annabeth and Percy should have been ripped to pieces by now. Instead, the monsters kept their distance, waiting for Tartarus to act. The god of the pit flexed his fingers, examining his own polished black talons. He had no expression, but he straightened his shoulders as if he were pleased. "It is good to have form," he intoned. "With these hands, I can eviscerate you." His voice sounded like a backwards recording, as if the words were being sucked into the vortex of his face, rather than projected. In fact, everything seemed to be drawn towards the face of this god. The dim light, the poisonous clouds, the essence of the monsters, even Annabeth's own fragile life force. She looked around and realised that every object on this vast plain had grown a vaporous comet's tail, all pointing towards Tartarus. Annabeth knew she should say something, but her instincts told her to hide, to avoid doing anything that would draw the god's attention. Besides, what could she say? "You won't get away with this?" That wasn't true. She and Percy had only survived this long because Tartarus was savouring his new form. He wanted the pleasure of physically ripping them to pieces. If Tartarus wished, Annabeth had no doubt he could devour her existence with a single thought, as easily as he'd vaporised Hyperion and Krios. Would there be any rebirth from that? Annabeth didn't want to find out. Next to her, Percy did something she'd never seen him do. He dropped his sword. It just fell out of his hand and hit the ground with a thud. Death mist no longer shrouded his face, but he still had the complexion of a corpse. Tartarus hissed again, possibly laughing. "Your fear smells wonderful," said the god. "I see the appeal of having a physical body with so many senses. Perhaps my beloved Gaia is right, wishing to wake from her slumber." He stretched out his massive purple hand and might have plucked up Percy like a weed, but Bob interrupted. "Begone!" The Titan levelled his spear at the god. "You have no right to meddle." "Meddle?" Tartarus turned. "I am the lord of all creatures of the darkness, puny Iapetus. I can do as I please." His black cyclone face spun faster. The howling sound was so horrible that Annabeth fell to her knees and clutched her ears. Bob stumbled, the wispy comet tail of his life force growing longer as it was sucked towards the face of the god. Bob roared in defiance. He charged and thrust his spear at Tartarus's chest. Before it could connect, Tartarus swatted Bob aside like he was a pesky insect. The Titan went sprawling. "Why do you not disintegrate?" Tartarus mused. "You are nothing. You are even weaker than Krios and Hyperion." "I am Bob," said Bob. Tartarus hissed. "What is that?" "What is Bob?" "I choose to be more than Iapetus," said the Titan. "You do not control me. I am not like my brothers." The collar of his coveralls bulged. Small Bob leapt out. The kitten landed on the ground in front of his master, then arched his back and hissed at the Lord of the Abyss. As Annabeth watched, small Bob began to grow, his form flickering until the little kitten had become a full-sized, translucent, skeletal, saber-toothed tiger. "Also," Bob announced, "I have a good cat." No longer small Bob sprang at Tartarus, sinking his claws into Tartarus's thigh. The tiger scrambled up his leg, straight under the god's chain-link skirt. Tartarus stomped and howled, apparently no longer enamoured with having a physical form. Meanwhile, Bob thrust his spear into the god's side, right below his breastplate. Tartarus roared. He swatted at Bob, but the Titan backed out of reach. Bob thrust out his fingers. His spear yanked itself free of the god's flesh and flew back to Bob's hand, which made Annabeth gulp in amazement. She'd never imagined a broom could have so many useful features. Small Bob dropped out of Tartarus's skirt. He ran to his master's side, his saber-toothed fangs dripping with golden ichor. "You will die first, Iapetus," Tartarus decided. "Afterwards I will add your soul to my armour, where it will slowly dissolve over and over in eternal agony." Tartarus pounded his fist against his breastplate. Milky faces swirled in the metal, silently screaming to get out. Bob turned towards Percy and Annabeth. The Titan grinned, which probably would not have been Annabeth's reaction to a threat of eternal agony. "Take the doors," Bob said. "I will deal with Tartarus." Tartarus threw back his head and bellowed, creating a vacuum so strong that the nearest flying demons were pulled into his vortex face and shredded. "Deal with me?" the god mocked. "You are only a Titan, a lesser child of Gaia. I will make you suffer for your arrogance, and as for your tiny mortal friends." Tartarus swept his hand towards the monster army, beckoning them forward. "Destroy them." Chapter 70. Annabeth. "Destroy them!" Annabeth had heard those words often enough when they shocked her out of her paralysis. She raised her sword and yelled, "Percy!" He snatched up Riptide. Annabeth dived for the chains holding the doors of death. Her Dracon bone blade cut through the left side moorings in a single swipe. Meanwhile, Percy drove back the first wave of monsters. He stabbed an awry and yelped, "Gah! Stupid curses!" Then he scythed down a half-dozen Telkeens. Annabeth lunged behind him and sliced through the chains on the other side. The doors shuddered, then opened with a pleasant ding. Bob and his saber-toothed sidekick continued to weave around Tartarus's legs, attacking and dodging to stay out of his clutches. They didn't seem to be doing much damage, but Tartarus lurched around, obviously not used to fighting in a humanoid body. He wiped and swiped and missed, swiped and missed. More monsters surged towards the doors. A spear flew past Annabeth's head. She turned and stabbed an Impusa through the gut, then dived for the doors as they started to close. She kept them open with her foot as she fought. At least with her back to the elevator car, she didn't have to worry about attacks from behind. "Percy, get over here!" she yelled. He joined her in the doorway, his face dripping with sweat and blood from several cuts. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Got some kind of pain curse from that awry." He hacked a Griffon out of the air. "Hurts, but it won't kill me. Get in the elevator. I'll hold the button." "Yeah, right." She smacked a carnivorous horse in the snout with the butt of her sword and sent the monster stampeding through the crowd. "You promised, Seaweed Brain, we would not get separated. Ever again." "You're impossible." "Love you too." An entire phalanx of Cyclopses charged forward, knocking smaller monsters out of the way. Annabeth figured she was about to die. It had to be the Cyclopses, she grumbled. Percy gave a battle cry. At the Cyclops' feet, a red vein in the ground burst open, spraying the monsters with liquid fire from the Phlegathon. The firewater might have healed mortals, but it didn't do the Cyclopses any favours. They combusted in a tidal wave of heat. The burst vein sealed itself, but nothing remained of the monsters except a row of scorch marks. "Annabeth, you have to go," Percy said. "We can't both stay." "No," she cried. "Duck!" He didn't ask why. He crouched, and Annabeth vaulted over him, bringing her sword down on the head of a heavily tattooed ogre. She and Percy stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, waiting for the next wave. The exploding vein had given the monsters pause, but it wouldn't be long before they remembered. "Hey, wait! There's 75 gazillion of us and only 2 of them." "Well then," Percy said, "you have a better idea?" Annabeth wished she did. The doors of death stood right behind them, their exit from this nightmarish world. But they couldn't use the doors without someone manning the controls for 12 long minutes. If they stepped inside and let the doors close without someone holding the button, Annabeth didn't think the results would be healthy. And if they stepped away from the doors for any reason, she imagined the elevator would close and disappear without them. The situation was so pathetically sad, it was almost funny. The crowd of monsters inched forward, snarling and gathering their courage. Meanwhile, Bob's attacks were getting slower. Tartarus was learning to control his new body. Saber-toothed Small Bob lunged at the god, but Tartarus smacked the cat sideways. Bob charged, bellowing with rage, but Tartarus grabbed his spear and yanked it out of his hands. He kicked Bob downhill, knocking over a row of Telkeens like sea mammal bowling pins. "Yield!" Tartarus thundered. "I will not," Bob said. "You are not my master." "Die in defiance, then," said the god of the pit. "You Titans are nothing to me. My children, the giants, were always better, stronger and more vicious. They will make the upper world as dark as my realm." Tartarus snapped the spear in half. Bob wailed in agony. Saber-toothed Small Bob leapt to his aid, snarling at Tartarus and baring his fangs. The Titan struggled to rise, but Annabeth knew it was over. Even the monsters turned to watch, as if sensing that their master Tartarus was about to take the spotlight. The death of a Titan was worth seeing. Percy gripped Annabeth's hand. "Stay here. I've got to help him." "Percy, you can't," she croaked. "Tartarus can't be fought. Not by us." She knew she was right. Tartarus was in a class by himself. He was more powerful than the gods or titans. Demigods were nothing to him. If Percy charged to help Bob, he would get squashed like an ant. But Annabeth also knew that Percy wouldn't listen. He couldn't leave Bob to die alone. That just wasn't him, and that was one of the many reasons she loved him, even if he was an Olympian-sized pain in the podex. We'll go together, Annabeth decided, knowing this would be their final battle. If they stepped away from the doors, they would never leave Tartarus. At least, they would die fighting side by side. She was about to say, now. A ripple of alarm passed through the army. In the distance, Annabeth heard shrieks, screams, and a persistent boom, boom, boom. That was too fast to be the heartbeat in the ground, more like something large and heavy, running at full speed. An earthborn spun into the air as if he'd been tossed. A plume of bright green gas billowed across the top of the monstrous horde like the spray from a poisoned riot hose. Everything in its path dissolved. Across the swathe of the sizzling, newly empty ground, Annabeth saw the cause of the commotion. She started to grin. The Myonian Drakon spread its frilled collar and hissed, its poison breath filling the battlefield with the smell of pine and ginger. It shifted its 100-foot-long body, flicking its dappled green tail and wiping out a battalion of ogres. Riding on its back was a red-skinned giant with flowers in his rust-coloured braids, a jerkin of green leather and a Drakon rib lance in his hand. "Damison!" Annabeth cried. The giant inclined his head. "Annabeth Chase, I took your advice. I chose myself a new fate." Chapter 71. Annabeth. "What is this?" The god of the pit hissed. "Why have you come, my disgraced son?" Damison glanced at Annabeth, a clear message in his eyes. "Go, now." He turned towards Tartarus. The Myonian Drakon stamped its feet and snarled. "Father, you wished for a more worthy opponent?" Damison asked calmly. "I am one of the giants you are so proud of. You wish me to be more warlike. Perhaps I will start by destroying you." Damison levelled his lance and charged. The monstrous army swarmed him, but the Myonian Drakon flattened everything in its path, sweeping its tail and spraying poison while Damison jabbed at Tartarus, forcing the god to retreat like a cornered lion. Bob stumbled away from the battle, his saber-toothed cat at his side. Percy gave them as much cover as he could, causing blood vessels in the ground to burst one after the other. Some monsters were vaporized in Styx water, others got a Casitas shower and collapsed, weeping hopelessly. Others were doused with liquid leth and stared blankly around them, no longer sure where they were or even who they were. Bob limped to the doors. Golden ichor flowed from the wounds on his arms and chest. His janitor's outfit hung in tatters. His posture was twisted and hunched, as if Tartarus, breaking the spear, had broken something inside him. Despite all that, he was grinning, his silver eyes bright with satisfaction. "Go," he ordered. "I will hold the button." Percy gawked at him. "Bob, you're in no condition." "Percy," Annabeth's voice threatened to break. She hated herself for letting Bob do this, but she knew it was the only way. "We have to. We can't just leave them." "You must, friend." Bob clapped Percy on the arm, nearly knocking him over. "I can still press a button, and I have a good cat to guard me." Small Bob, the saber-tooth, growled in agreement. "Besides," Bob said, "it is your destiny to return to the world, put an end to this madness of Gaia." A screaming cyclops, sizzling from poison spray, sailed over their heads. 50 yards away, the Myonian Drakon trampled through monsters, its feet making sickening squish-squish noises, as if stomping grapes. On its back, Damison yelled insults and jabbed at the god of the pit, taunting Tartarus further away from the doors. Tartarus lumbered after him, his iron boots making craters in the ground. "You cannot kill me," he bellowed. "I am the pit itself. You might as well try to kill the earth. Gaia and I, we are eternal. We own you, flesh and spirit." He brought down his massive fist, but Damison sidestepped, impaling his javelin in the side of Tartarus's neck. Tartarus growled, apparently more annoyed than hurt. He turned his swirling vacuum face towards the giant, but Damison got away, out of the way in time. A dozen monsters were sucked into the vortex and disintegrated. "Bob, don't," Percy said, his eyes pleading. "He'll destroy you permanently. No coming back. No regeneration." Bob shrugged. "Who knows what will be? You must go now. Tartarus is right about one thing. We cannot defeat him. We can only buy you time." The doors tried to close on Annabeth's foot. 12 minutes, said the Titan. "I can give you that." "Percy, hold the doors." Annabeth jumped and threw her arms around the Titan's neck. She kissed his cheek, her eyes so full of tears she couldn't see straight. Bob's stubbly face smelled of cleaning supplies, fresh lemony furniture polish, and Murphy oil wood soap. Monsters are eternal, she told him, trying to keep herself from sobbing. We will remember you, and Damison as heroes, as the best Titan and the best giant. We'll tell our children. We'll keep the story alive. Someday you will regenerate. Bob ruffled her hair. Smile lines crinkled around his eyes. That is good. Until then, my friends, tell the sun and the stars hello for me. And be strong. This may not be the last sacrifice you must make to stop Gaia. He pushed her away gently. No more time. Go. Annabeth grabbed Percy's arm. She dragged him into the elevator car. She had one last glimpse of the Myonian Drakon shaking an ogre like a sock puppet, Damison jabbing at Tartarus's legs. The god of the pit pointed at the doors of death and yelled, Monsters! Stop them! Small Bob, the saber-toothed cat, crouched and snarled, ready for action. Bob winked at Annabeth. Hold the doors closed on your side, he said. They will resist your passage. Hold them! The panels slid shut. Chapter 72. Annabeth. Percy, help me, Annabeth yelped. She shoved her entire body against the left door, pressing it towards the centre. Percy did the same on the right. There were no handles or anything else to hold on to. As the elevator car ascended, the doors shook and tried to open, threatening to spill them into whatever was between life and death. Annabeth's shoulders ached. The elevator's easy listening music didn't help. If all monsters had to hear that song about liking pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, no wonder they were in a mood for carnage when they reached the mortal world. We left Bob and Damison, Percy croaked. They'll die for us. And we just... I know, she murmured. Gods of Olympus, Percy, I know. Annabeth was almost glad of the job of keeping the doors closed. The terror racing through her heart, at least, kept her from dissolving into misery. Abandoning Damison and Bob had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. For years at Camp Half-Blood, she had chafed as other campers went on quests while she stayed behind. She'd watched as others gained glory or failed and didn't come back. Since she was 7 years old, she had thought, why don't I get to prove my skills? Why can't I lead a quest? Now she realised that the hardest test for a child of Athena wasn't leading a quest or facing death in combat. It was making the strategic decision to step back, to let someone else take the brunt of the danger, especially when that person was your friend. She had to face the fact that she couldn't protect everyone she loved. She couldn't solve every problem. She hated it, but she didn't have time for self-pity. She blinked away her tears. Percy, the doors, she warned. The panels had started to slide apart, letting in a whiff of ozone, sulphur. Percy pushed on the side furiously, and the crack closed. His eyes blazed with anger. She hoped he wasn't mad at her, but if he was, she couldn't blame him. If it keeps him going, she thought, then let him be angry. I will kill Gaia, he muttered. I will tear her apart with my bare hands. Annabeth nodded, but she was thinking about Tartarus's boast. He could not be killed. Neither could Gaia. Against such power, even titans and giants were hopelessly outmatched. Demigods stood no chance. She also remembered Bob's warning. This may not be the last sacrifice you must make to stop Gaia. She felt that truth deep in her bones. 12 minutes, she murmured. Just 12 minutes. She prayed to Athena that Bob could hold up the up button that long. She prayed for strength and wisdom. She wondered what they would find once they reached the top of the elevator ride. If their friends weren't there, controlling the other side. We can do this, Percy said. We have to. Yeah, Annabeth said. Yeah, we do. They held the doors shut as the elevator shuddered and the music played, while somewhere below them a titan and a giant sacrificed their lives for their escape. Chapter 73. Hazel. Hazel wasn't proud of crying. After the tunnel collapsed, she wept and screamed like a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum. She couldn't move the debris that separated her and Leo from the others. If the earth shifted any more, the entire complex might collapse on their heads. Still, she pounded her fists against the stones and yelled curses that would have earned her a mouthwashing with lye soap back at St. Agnes Academy. Leo stared at her, wide-eyed and speechless. She wasn't being fair to him. The last time the two of them had been together, she'd zapped him into her past and shown him Sammy, his great-grandfather, Hazel's first boyfriend. She'd burdened him with emotional baggage he didn't need and left him so dazed they'd almost been killed by a giant shrimp monster. Now here they were, alone again, while their friends might be dying at the hands of a monster army, and she was throwing a fit. Sorry, she wiped her face. Hey, you know, Leo shrugged. I've attacked a few rocks in my day. She swallowed with difficulty. Listen, Leo said. Frank Zhang has moves. He's probably gonna turn into a kangaroo and do some marsupial jiu-jitsu on their ugly faces. He helped her to her feet. Despite the panic simmering inside her, she knew Leo was right. Frank and the others weren't helpless. They would find a way to survive. The best thing she and Leo could do was to carry on. She studied Leo. His hair had grown out longer and shaggier, and his face was leaner, so he looked less like an imp and more like one of those willowy elves in the fairy tales. The biggest difference was his eyes. They constantly drifted, as if Leo was trying to spot something over the horizon. "Leo, I'm sorry," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Okay, for what?" "For..." She gestured around her helplessly. "Everything. For thinking you were Sammy, for leading you on. I mean, I didn't mean to, but if I did..." "Hey." He squeezed her hand, though Hazel sensed nothing romantic in the gesture. "Machines are designed to work." What?" "I figured the universe is basically like a machine. I don't know who made it, if it was the fates or the gods or capital G, God or whatever, but it chugs along the way it's supposed to most of the time. Sure, little pieces break and stuff goes haywire once in a while, but mostly things happen for a reason, like you and me meeting." "Leo Valdez," Hazel marvelled. "You're a philosopher." "Nah," he said, "I'm just a mechanic. But I figure my bisabuelo Sammy knew what was what. He let you go, Hazel. My job is to tell you that it's okay. You and Frank, you're good together. We're all going to get through this. I hope you guys get a chance to be happy. Besides, Zhang couldn't tie his shoes without your help." "That's mean," Hazel chided, but she felt like something was untangling inside her, a knot of tension she'd been carrying for weeks. Leo really had changed. Hazel was starting to think she'd found a good friend. "What happened to you when you were on your own?" she asked. "Who did you meet?" Leo's eye twitched. "Long story. I'll tell you sometime, but I'm still waiting to see how it shakes out." "The universe is a machine," Hazel said, "so it'll be fine. Hopefully. As long as it's not one of your machines," Hazel added, "because your machines never do what they're supposed to." "Yeah, haha." Leo summoned fire into his hand. "Now, which way, Miss Underground?" Hazel scanned the path in front of them. About 30 feet down, the tunnel split into 4 smaller arteries, each one identical, but the one on the left radiated cold. "That way," she decided. "It feels the most dangerous." "I'm sold," said Leo, and they began their descent. As soon as they reached the first archway, the polecat Gale found them. She scurried up Hazel's side and curled around her neck, chittering crossly as if to say, "Where have you been? You're late." "Not the farting weasel again," Leo complained. "If that thing lets loose in close quarters like this, with my fire and all, we're going to explode." Gale barked a polecat insult at Leo. Hazel hushed them both. She could sense the tunnel ahead, sloping gently down for about 300 feet, then opening into a large chamber. In that chamber was a presence, cold, heavy and powerful. Hazel hadn't felt anything like it since the cave in Alaska, where Gaia had forced her to resurrect Porphyrion the Giant King. Hazel had thwarted Gaia's plans that time, but she'd had to pull down the cavern, sacrificing her life and her mother's. She wasn't anxious to have a similar experience. "Leo, be ready," she whispered. "We're getting close." "Close to what?" A woman's voice echoed down the corridor. "Close to me." A wave of nausea hit Hazel so hard her knees buckled. The whole world shifted. Her sense of direction, usually flawless underground, became completely unmoored. She and Leo didn't seem to move, but suddenly they were 300 feet down the corridor at the entrance of the chamber. "Welcome," said the woman's voice. "I've looked forward to this." Hazel's eyes swept the cavern. She couldn't see the speaker. The room reminded her of the Pantheon in Rome, except this place had been decorated in Hades modern. The obsidian walls were carved with scenes of death, plague victims, corpses on the battlefield, torture chambers with skeletons hanging in iron cages, all of it embellished with precious gems that somehow made the scenes even more ghastly. As in the Pantheon, the domed roof was a waffle pattern of recessed square panels, but here each panel was a stela, a grave marker with ancient Greek inscriptions. Hazel wondered if actual bodies were buried behind them. With her underground senses out of whack, she couldn't be sure. She saw no other exits. At the apex of the ceiling, where the Pantheon skylight would have been, a circle of pure black stone gleamed, as if to reinforce the sense that there was no way out of this place, no sky above, only darkness. Hazel's eyes drifted to the centre of the room. "Yep," Leo muttered. "Those are doors, all right." 50 feet away was a set of freestanding elevator doors, their panels etched in silver and iron. Rows of chains ran down either side, bolting the frame to large hooks in the floor. The area around the doors was littered with black rubble. With a tightening sense of anger, Hazel realised that an ancient altar to Hades had once stood there. It had been destroyed to make room for the doors of death. "Where are you?" she shouted. "Don't you see us?" taunted the woman's voice. "I thought Hecate chose you for your skill." Another bout of queasiness churned through Hazel's gut. On her shoulder, Gale barked and passed gas, which didn't help. Dark spots floated in Hazel's eyes. She tried to blink them away, but they only turned darker. The spots consolidated into a 20-foot-tall shadowy figure looming next to the doors. The giant, Clytius, was shrouded in the black smoke, just as she'd seen in her vision at the crossroads. But now Hazel could dimly make out his form. Dragon-like legs with ash-coloured scales, a massive humanoid upper body encased in Stygian armour, long braided hair that seemed to be made from smoke. His complexion was as dark as Death's. Hazel should know, since she had met Death personally. His eyes glinted cold as diamonds. He carried no weapon, but that didn't make him any less terrifying. Leo whistled. You know, Clytius, for such a big dude, you've got a beautiful voice. Idiot, hissed the woman. Halfway between Hazel and the giant, the air shimmered. The sorceress appeared. She wore an elegant sleeveless dress of woven gold, her dark hair piled into a cone, encircled with diamonds and emeralds. Around her neck hung a pendant, like a miniature maze, on a cord set with rubies that made Hazel think of crystallized blood drops. The woman was beautiful in a timeless, regal way, like a statue you might admire, but could never love. Her eyes sparkled with malice. Pasiphae, Hazel said. The woman inclined her head. My dear Hazel Levesque. Leo coughed. You two know each other? Like underworld chums or... Silence, fool! Pasiphae's voice was soft but full of venom. I have no use for demigod boys, always so full of themselves, so brash and destructive. Hey, lady, Leo protested. I don't destroy things much. I'm a son of Hephaestus. A tinkerer, snapped Pasiphae. Even worse. I knew Daedalus. His inventions brought me nothing but trouble. Leo blinked. Daedalus? Like the Daedalus? Well then, you should know all about us tinkerers. We're more into fixing, building, occasionally sticking wads of oilcloth in the mouths of rude ladies. Leo! Hazel put her arm across his chest. She had a feeling the sorceress was about to turn him into something unpleasant if he didn't shut up. Let me take this, okay? Listen to your friend, Pasiphae said. Be a good boy and let the woman talk. Pasiphae paced in front of them, examining Hazel, her eyes so full of hate it made Hazel's skin tingle. The sorceress's power radiated from her like heat from a furnace. Her expression was unsettling and vaguely familiar. Somehow, though, the giant Clytius unnerved Hazel more. He stood in the background, silent and motionless except for the dark smoke pouring from his body, pooling around his feet. He was the cold presence Hazel had felt earlier, like a vast deposit of obsidian, so heavy that Hazel couldn't possibly move it, powerful and indestructible, and completely devoid of emotion. Your friend doesn't say much, Hazel noted. Pasiphae looked back at the giant and sniffed with disdain. Pray he stay silent, my dear. Gaia has given me the pleasure of dealing with you, but Clytius is my, insurance. Just between you and me as sister sorceresses, I think he's also here to keep my powers in check, in case I forget my new mistress's orders. Gaia is careful that way. Hazel was tempted to protest that she wasn't a sorceress. She didn't want to know how Pasiphae planned to deal with them, or how the giant kept her magic in check, but she straightened her back and tried to look confident. Whatever you're planning, Hazel said, it won't work. We've cut through every monster Gaia's put in our path. If you're smart, you'll get out of our way. Gale, the polecat, gnashed her teeth in approval, but Pasiphae didn't seem impressed. You don't look like much, the sorceress mused, but then you demigods never do. My husband, Minos, king of Crete, he was a son of Zeus. You would have never known it by looking at him. He was almost as scrawny as that one. She flicked her hand towards Leo. Wow, muttered Leo. Minos must have done something really horrible to deserve you. Pasiphae's nostrils flared. Oh, you have no idea. He was too proud to make the proper sacrifices to Poseidon, so the gods punished me for his arrogance. The Minotaur. Hazel suddenly remembered. The story was so revolting and grotesque, Hazel had always shut her ears when they told it at Camp Jupiter. Pasiphae had been cursed to fall in love with her husband's prize bull. She'd given birth to the Minotaur, half man, half bull. Now, as Pasiphae glared daggers at her, Hazel realised why her expression was so familiar. The sorceress had the same bitterness and hatred in her eyes that Hazel's mother sometimes had. In her worst moments, Marie Levesque would look at Hazel as if Hazel were a monstrous child, a curse from the gods, the source of all Marie's problems. That's why the Minotaur story bothered Hazel. Not just the repellent idea of Pasiphae and the bull, but the idea that a child, any child, could be considered a monster, a punishment to its parents, to be locked away and hated. To Hazel, the Minotaur had always seemed like a victim in the story. Yes, Pasiphae said at last, My disgrace was unbearable. After my son was born and locked in the labyrinth, Minos refused to have anything to do with me. He said I had ruined his reputation. And do you know what happened to Minos, Abel Levesque? For his crimes and his pride, he was rewarded. He was made a judge of the dead in the underworld, as if he had any right to judge others. Hades gave him that position. Your father. Pluto, actually. Pasiphae sneered. Irrelevant. So you see, I hate demigods as much as I hate the gods. Any of your brethren who survived the war, Gaia has promised to me, so that I may watch them die slowly in my new domain. I only wish I had more time to torture you two properly. Alas. In the centre of the room, the doors of death made a pleasant chiming sound. The green up button on the right side of the frame began to glow. The chains shook. There, you see? Pasiphae shrugged apologetically. The doors are in use. 12 minutes and they will open. Hazel's gut trembled almost as much as the chains. More giants? Thankfully, no, said the sorceress. They are all accounted for, back in the mortal world and in place for the final assault. Pasiphae gave her a cold smile. No, I would imagine the doors are being used by someone else. Someone unauthorized. Leo inched forward. Smoke rose from his fists. Percy and Annabeth. Hazel couldn't speak. She wasn't sure whether the lump in her throat was from joy or frustration, if their friends had made it to the doors, if they were really going to show up here in 12 minutes. Oh, not to worry. Pasiphae waved her hand dismissively. Clytius will handle them. You see, when the chime sounds again, someone on our side needs to push the up button, or the doors will fail to open, and whoever is inside, poof, gone. Or perhaps Clytius will let them out and deal with them in person. That depends on you two. Hazel's mouth tasted like tin. She didn't want to ask, but she had to. How exactly does it depend on us? Well, obviously we need only one set of demigods alive, Pasiphae said. The lucky two will be taken to Athens and sacrificed to Gaia at the Feast of Hope. Obviously, Leo muttered. So, will it be you two, or your friends in the elevator? The sorceress spread her hands. Let's see who is still alive in 12, actually 11 minutes now. The cavern dissolved into darkness. Chapter 74. Hazel. Hazel's internal compass spun wildly. She remembered when she had been very small in New Orleans in the late 1930s. Her mother had taken her to the dentist to get a bad tooth pulled. It was the first and only time Hazel had ever received ether. The dentist promised it would make her sleepy and relaxed. But Hazel felt like she was floating away from her own body, panicky and out of control. When the ether wore off, she'd been sick for 3 days. This felt like a massive dose of ether. Part of her knew she was still in the cavern. Pasiphae stood only a few feet in front of them. Clytius waited silently in the doors of death. But layers of mist enfolded Hazel, twisting her sense of reality. She took one step forward and bumped into a wall that shouldn't have been there. Leo pressed his hands against the stone. What the heck? Where are we? A corridor stretched out to their left and right, torches guttered in iron sconces. The air smelled of mildew, as in an old tomb. On Hazel's shoulder, Gale barked angrily, digging her claws into Hazel's collarbone. Yes, I know, Hazel muttered to the weasel. It's an illusion. Leo pounded on the wall. Pretty solid illusion. Pasiphae laughed. Her voice sounded watery and far away. Is it an illusion, Hazel Levesque? Or something more? Don't you see what I've created? Hazel felt so off balance she could barely stand, much less think straight. She tried to extend her senses, to see through the mist and find the cavern again, but all she felt were tunnels splitting off in a dozen directions, going everywhere except forward. Random thoughts glinted in her mind, like gold nuggets coming to the surface. Daedalus. The Minotaur locked away. Die slowly in my new domain. The labyrinth, Hazel said. She's remaking the labyrinth. What now? Leo had been tapping the wall with a ball-peen hammer, but he turned and frowned at her. I thought the labyrinth collapsed during the battle at Camp Half-Blood, like it was connected to Daedalus's life force or something, and then he died. Pasiphae's voice clucked disapprovingly. Ah, but I am still alive. You credit Daedalus with all the maze's secrets. I breathed magical life into his labyrinth. Daedalus was nothing compared to me, the immortal sorceress, daughter of Helios, sister of Circe. Now the labyrinth will be my domain. It's an illusion, Hazel insisted. We just have to break through it. Even as she said it, the walls seemed to grow more solid, the smell of mildew more intense. Too late, Pasiphae crooned. The maze is already awake. It will spread under the skin of the earth once more, while your mortal world is levelled. You demigods, you heroes, will wander its corridors, dying slowly of thirst and fear and misery. Or perhaps, if I am feeling merciful, you will die quickly, in great pain. Holes opened in the floor beneath Hazel's feet. She grabbed Leo and pushed him aside as a row of spikes shot upward, impaling the ceiling. "Run!" she yelled. Pasiphae's laughter echoed down the corridor. "Where are you going, young sorceress? Running from an illusion?" Hazel didn't answer. She was too busy trying to stay alive. Behind them, row after row of spikes shot towards the ceiling with a persistent thunk, thunk, thunk. She pulled Leo down a side corridor, leapt over a tripwire, and then stumbled to a halt in front of a pit 20 feet across. "How deep is that?" Leo gasped for breath. His trouser leg was ripped where one of the spikes had grazed him. Hazel's senses told her that the pit was at least 50 feet straight down, with a pool of poison at the bottom. Could she trust her senses? Whether or not Pasiphae had created a new labyrinth, Hazel believed they were still in some cavern, being made to run aimlessly back and forth while Pasiphae and Clytius watched in amusement. Illusion or not, unless Hazel could figure out how to get out of this maze, the traps would kill them. 8 minutes now, said the voice of Pasiphae. "I'd love to see you survive, truly. That would prove your worthy sacrifices to Gaia in Athens, but then, of course, we wouldn't need your friends in the elevator." Hazel's heart pounded. She faced the wall to her left. Despite what her senses told her, that should be the direction of the doors. Pasiphae should be right in front of her. Hazel wanted to burst through the wall and throttle the sorceress. In 8 minutes, she and Leo needed to be at the doors of death to let their friends out. But Pasiphae was an immortal sorceress with thousands of years of experience in weaving spells. Hazel couldn't defeat her through sheer willpower. She'd managed to fool the bandit Skyron by showing him what he expected to see. Hazel needed to figure out what Pasiphae wanted most. 7 minutes now, Pasiphae lamented. "If only we had more time. So many indignities I'd like you to suffer." That was it, Hazel realised. She had to run the gauntlet. She had to make the maze more dangerous, more spectacular, make Pasiphae focus on the traps rather than the direction the labyrinth was leading. "Leo, we're going to jump," Hazel said. "But it's not as far as it looks. Go." She grabbed his hand and they launched themselves across the pit. When they landed, Hazel looked back and saw no pit at all, just a 3-inch crack in the floor. "Come on," she urged. They ran as the voice of Pasiphae droned on. "Oh dear, no, you'll never survive that way. 6 minutes. The ceiling above them cracked apart. Gale the weasel squeaked in alarm, but Hazel imagined a new tunnel leading off to the left, a tunnel even more dangerous, going in the wrong direction. The mist softened under her will. The tunnel appeared, and they dashed to one side. Pasiphae sighed with disappointment. "You really aren't very good at this, my dear." But Hazel felt a spark of hope. She'd created a tunnel. She'd driven a small wedge into the magic fabric of the labyrinth. The floor collapsed under them. Hazel jumped to one side, dragging Leo with her. She imagined another tunnel, veering back the way they'd come, but full of poisonous gas. The maze obliged. "Leo, hold your breath," she warned. They plunged through the toxic fog. Hazel's eyes felt like they were being rinsed in pepper juice, but she kept running. 5 minutes, Pasiphae said. "Alas, if only I could watch you suffer longer." They burst into a corridor with fresh air. Leo coughed. "If only she would shut up." They ducked under a bronze garrote wire. Hazel imagined the tunnel curving back towards Pasiphae, ever so slightly. The mist bent to her will. The walls of the tunnel began to close in on either side. Hazel didn't try to stop them. She made them close faster, shaking the floor and cracking the ceiling. She and Leo ran for their lives, following the curve as it brought them closer to what she hoped was the centre of the room. "A pity," said Pasiphae. "I wish I could kill you and your friends in the elevator, but Gaia has insisted that 2 of you must be kept alive until the Feast of Hope, when your blood will be put to good use. Ah well, I will have to find another victim for my labyrinth. You 2 have been second-rate failures." Hazel and Leo stumbled to a stop. In front of them stretched a chasm so wide Hazel couldn't see the other side. From somewhere below in the darkness came the sound of hissing, thousands and thousands of snakes. Hazel was tempted to retreat, but the tunnel was closing behind them, leaving them stranded on a tiny ledge. Gale the weasel paced across Hazel's shoulders and farted with anxiety. Okay, Leo muttered. "The walls are moving parts. They got to be mechanical. Give me a second." "No, Leo," Hazel said. "There's no way back." "But hold my hand," she said. "On 3. "But 3. What?" Hazel leapt into the pit, pulling Leo with her. She tried to ignore his screaming and the flatulent weasel clinging to her neck. She bent all her will into redirecting the magic of the labyrinth. Pasiphae laughed with delight, knowing that any moment they would be crushed or bitten to death in a pit of snakes. Instead, Hazel imagined a chute in the darkness, just to their left. She twisted in mid-air and fell towards it. She and Leo hit the chute hard and slid into the cavern, landing right on top of Pasiphae. Ark! The sorceress's head smacked against the floor as Leo sat down hard on her chest. For a moment, the three of them and the weasel were a pile of sprawling bodies and flailing limbs. Hazel tried to draw her sword, but Pasiphae managed to extricate herself first. The sorceress backed away, her hairdo bent sideways like a collapsed cake. Her dress was smeared with grease stains from Leo's tool belt. "You miserable wretches!" she howled. The maze was gone. A few feet away, Clytius stood with his back to them, watching the doors of death. By Hazel's calculation, they had about 30 seconds until their friends arrived. Hazel felt exhausted from her run through the maze while controlling the mist, but she needed to pull off one more trick. She had successfully made Pasiphae see what she most desired. Now Hazel had to make the sorceress see what she most feared. "You must really hate demigods," Hazel said, trying to mimic Pasiphae's cruel smile. "We always get the better of you, don't we, Pasiphae?" "Nonsense!" screamed Pasiphae. "I will tear you apart. I will—" "We're always pulling the rug out from under your feet," Hazel sympathised. "Your husband betrayed you. Theseus killed the Minotaur, stole your daughter Ariadne. Now, 2 second-rate failures have turned your own maze against you. But you knew it would come to this, didn't you? You always fail in the end." "I am immortal," Pasiphae wailed. She took a step back, fingering her necklace. "You cannot stand against me." "You can't stand at all," Hazel countered. "Look." She pointed at the feet of the sorceress. A trapdoor opened underneath Pasiphae. She fell screaming into a bottomless pit that didn't really exist. The floor solidified. The sorceress was gone. Leo stared at Hazel in amazement. "How did you—" Just then the elevator dinged. Rather than pushing the up button, Clytius stepped back from the controls, keeping their friends trapped inside. "Leo!" Hazel yelled. They were 30 feet away, much too far to reach the elevator, but Leo pulled out a screwdriver and chucked it like a throwing knife. An impossible shot. The screwdriver spun straight past Clytius and slammed into the up button. The doors of death opened with a hiss. Black smoke billowed out, and 2 bodies spilled face first onto the floor. Percy and Annabeth, limp as corpses. Hazel sobbed. "Oh, gods!" She and Leo started forward, but Clytius raised his hand in an unmistakable gesture. "Stop." He lifted his massive reptilian foot over Percy's head. The giant smoky shroud poured over the floor, covering Annabeth and Percy in a pool of dark fog. "Clytius, you've lost," Hazel snarled. "Let them go, or you'll end up like Pasiphae." The giant tilted his head. His diamond eyes gleamed. At his feet, Annabeth lurched like she'd hit a power line. She rolled on her back, black smoke coiling from her mouth. "I am not Pasiphae." Annabeth spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, the words as deep as a bass guitar. "You have won nothing." "Stop that!" Even from 30 feet away, Hazel could sense Annabeth's life force waning, her pulse becoming freddy. Whatever Clytius was doing, pulling words from her mouth, it was killing her. Clytius nudged Percy's head with his foot. Percy's face lolled to one side. "Not quite dead." The giant's words boomed from Percy's mouth. "A terrible shock to the mortal body. I would imagine coming back from Tartarus. They'll be out for a while." He turned his attention back to Annabeth. More smoke poured from her between her lips. "I'll tie them up and take them to Porphyrion in Athens. Just the sacrifice we need. Unfortunately, that means I have no further use for you two." "Oh yeah?" Leo growled. "Well, maybe you got the smoke, buddy, but I've got the fire." His hands blazed. He shot white-hot columns of flame at the giant, but Clytius's smoky aura absorbed them on impact. Tendrils of black haze travelled back up the lines of fire, snuffing out the light and heat and covering Leo in darkness. Leo fell to his knees, clutching at his throat. "No!" Hazel ran towards him, but Gale chattered urgently on her shoulder, a clear warning. "I would not." Clytius's voice reverberated from Leo's mouth. "You do not understand, Hazel Levesque. I devour magic. I destroy the voice and the soul. You cannot oppose me." Black fog spread further across the room, covering Annabeth and Percy, billowing towards Hazel. Blood roared in Hazel's ears. She had to act. But how? If that black smoke could incapacitate Leo so quickly, what chance did she have? "Fire," she stammered in a small voice. "You're supposed to be weak against it." The giant chuckled, using Annabeth's vocal cords this time. "You were counting on that, eh? It is true I do not like fire, but Leo Valdez's flames are not strong enough to trouble me." Somewhere behind Hazel, a soft, lyrical voice said, "What about my flames, old friend?" Gale squeaked excitedly and jumped from Hazel's shoulder, scampering to the entrance of the cavern, where a blonde woman stood in a black dress, the mist swirling around her. The giant stumbled backwards, bumping into the doors of death. "You," he said from Percy's mouth. "Me," Hecate agreed. She spread her arms. Blazing torches appeared in her hands. "It has been millennia since I fought at the side of a demigod, but Hazel Levesque has proven herself worthy. What do you say, Clytius? Shall we play with fire?" Chapter 75. Hazel. If the giant had run away screaming, Hazel would have been grateful. Then they all could have taken the rest of the day off. Clytius disappointed her. When he saw the goddess's torches blazing, the giant seemed to recover his wits. He stomped his foot, shaking the floor and almost stepping on Annabeth's arm. Dark smoke billowed around him until Annabeth and Percy were totally hidden. Hazel could see nothing but the giant's gleaming eyes. "Bold words." Clytius spoke from Leo's mouth. "You forget, goddess. When we last met, you had the help of Hercules and Dionysus, the most powerful heroes in the world, both of them destined to become gods. Now you bring these?" Leo's unconscious body contorted in pain. "Stop it!" Hazel yelled. She didn't plan what happened next. She simply knew she had to protect her friends. She imagined them behind her. The same way she'd imagined new tunnels appearing in Pasiphae's labyrinth. Leo dissolved. He reappeared at Hazel's feet, along with Percy and Annabeth. The mist whirled around her, spilling over the stones and enveloping her friends. Where the white mist met the dark smoke of Clytius, it steamed and sizzled, like lava rolling into the sea. Leo opened his eyes and gasped. "What?" Annabeth and Percy remained motionless, but Hazel could sense their heartbeats getting stronger, their breath coming more evenly. On Hecate's shoulder, Gale the polecat barked with admiration. The goddess stepped forward, her dark eyes glittering in the torchlight. "You're right, Clytius. Hazel Levesque is not Hercules or Dionysus, but I think you will find her just as formidable." Through the smoky shroud, Hazel saw the giant open his mouth. No words came out. Clytius sneered in frustration. Leo tried to sit up. "What's going on? What can I—" "Watch Percy and Annabeth." Hazel drew her spaffer. "Stay behind me. Stay in the mist." "But—" The look Hazel gave him must have been more severe than she realized. Leo gulped. "Yeah, got it. White mist good, black smoke bad." Hazel advanced. The giant spread his arms. The domed ceiling shook and the giant's voice echoed through the room, magnified 100 times. "Formidable," the giant demanded. It sounded as if he was speaking through a chorus of the dead, using all the unfortunate souls who'd been buried behind the dome's stelae. "Because the girl has learned your magic tricks, Hecate? Because you allow these weaklings to hide in your mist?" A sword appeared in the giant's hand, a Stygian iron blade, much like Nico's, except 5 times the size. "I do not understand why Gaia would find any of these demigods worthy of sacrifice. I will crush them like empty nutshells." Hazel's fear turned to rage. She screamed. The walls of the chamber made a crackling sound like an ice in warm water, and dozens of gems streaked towards the giant, punching through his armour like buckshot. Clytius staggered backwards. His disembodied voice bellowed with pain. His iron breastplate was peppered with holes. Golden ichor trickled from a wound on his right arm. His shroud of darkness thinned. Hazel could see the murderous expression on his face. "You!" Clytius growled. "You worthless!" "Worthless?" Hecate asked quietly. "I'd say Hazel Levesque knows a few tricks. Even I could not teach her." Hazel stood in front of her friends, determined to protect them, but her energy was fading. Her sword was already heavy in her hand, and she didn't even swing it yet. She wished Arion were here. She could use the horse's speed and strength. Unfortunately, her equine friend would not be able to help her this time. He was a creature of the wide-open spaces, not the underground. The giant dug his fingers into the wound on his biceps. He pulled out a diamond and flicked it aside. The wound closed. "So, daughter of Pluto," Clytius rumbled, "do you really believe Hecate has your interests at heart? Circe was a favourite of hers, and Medea, and Pasiphae. How did they end up, eh?" Behind her, Hazel heard Annabeth stirring, groaning in pain. Percy muttered something that sounded like Bob? Clytius stepped forward, holding his sword casually at his side, as if they were comrades rather than enemies. "Hecate will not tell you the truth. She sends acolytes like you to do her bidding and take all the risk. If by some miracle you incapacitate me, only then will she be able to set me on fire. Then she will claim the glory of the kill. You heard how Bacchus dealt with the Alode twins in the Colosseum. Hecate is worse. She is a titan who betrayed the titans. Then she betrayed the gods. Do you really think she will keep faith with you?" Hecate's face was unreadable. "I cannot answer his accusations, Hazel," said the goddess. "This is your crossroads. You must choose." Yes, crossroads. The giant's laughter echoed. His wounds seemed to have healed completely. "Hecate offers you obscurity, choices, vague promises of magic. I am the anti-Hecate. I will give you truth. I will eliminate choices and magic. I will strip away the mist once and for all and show you the world in all its true horror." Leo struggled to his feet, coughing like an asthmatic. "I'm loving this guy," he wheezed. "Seriously, we should keep him around for inspirational seminars." His hands ignited like blowtorches. "Or I could just light him up." "Leo, no," Hazel said. "My father's temple. My call." "Yeah, okay, but—" "Hazel," Annabeth wheezed. Hazel was so elated to hear her friend's voice that she almost turned, but she knew she couldn't take her eyes off Clytius. "The chains," Annabeth managed. Hazel inhaled sharply. She'd been a fool. The doors of death were still open, shuddering against the chains that held them in place. Hazel had to cut them free so that they would disappear and finally be beyond Gaia's reach. The only problem, a big smoky giant stood in her way. "You can't seriously believe you have the strength," Clytius chided. "What will you do, Hazel Levesque? Pelt me with more rubies? Shower me with sapphires?" Hazel gave him an answer. She raised her spatha and charged. Apparently, Clytius hadn't expected her to be quite so suicidal. He was slow raising his sword. By the time he slashed, Hazel had ducked between his legs and jabbed her imperial gold blade into his gluteus maximus. Not very ladylike. The nuns at St. Agnes would never have approved. But it worked. Clytius roared and arched his back, waddling away from her. Mist still swirled around Hazel, hissing as it met the giant's black smoke. Hazel realised that Hecate was assisting her, lending her the strength to keep up a defensive shroud. Hazel also knew that the instant her own concentration wavered and that darkness touched her, she would collapse. If that happened, she wasn't sure Hecate would be able or willing to stop the giant from crushing her and her friends. Hazel sprinted towards the doors of death. Her blade shattered the chains on the left side like they were made of ice. She lunged to the right, but Clytius yelled, "No!" By sheer luck, she wasn't cut in half. The flat of the giant's blade caught her in the chest, sent her flying. She slammed into the wall and felt bones crack. Across the room, Leo screamed her name. Through her blurry vision, she saw a flash of fire. Hecate stood nearby, her form shimmering as if she were about to dissolve. Her torches seemed to be flickering out. But it might just have been that Hazel was starting to lose consciousness. She couldn't give up now. She forced herself to stand. Her side felt like it was embedded with razor blades. Her sword lay on the ground about 5 feet away. She staggered towards it. "Clytius!" she shouted. She meant it to sound like a brave challenge, but it came out more as a croak. At least it got his attention. The giant turned from Leo and the others. When he saw her limping forward, he laughed. "A good try, Hazel Levesque," Clytius admitted. "You did better than I anticipated. But magic alone cannot defeat me, and you do not have sufficient strength. Hecate has failed you, as she fails all her followers in the end." The mist around her was thinning. At the other end of the room, Leo tried to force-feed Percy some ambrosia, though Percy was still pretty much out of it. Annabeth was awake but struggling, barely able to lift her head. Hecate stood with her torches, watching and waiting, which infuriated Hazel so much she found one last burst of energy. She threw her sword, not at the giant but at the doors of death. The chains on the right side shattered. Hazel collapsed in agony, her side burning, as the doors shuddered and disappeared in a flash of purple light. Clytius roared so loudly that a half-dozen stellae fell from the ceiling and shattered. "That was for my brother Nico," Hazel gasped, "and for destroying my father's altar." "You have forfeited your right to a quick death," the giant snarled. "I will suffocate you in darkness, slowly, painfully. Hecate cannot help you. No one can help you." The goddess raised her torches. "I would not be so certain, Clytius. Hazel's friends simply needed a little time to reach her. Time you have given them with your boasting and bragging." Clytius snorted. "What friends? These weaklings? They are no challenge." In front of Hazel, the air rippled. The mist thickened, creating a doorway, and 4 people stepped through. Hazel wept with relief. Frank's arm was bleeding and bandaged, but he was alive. Next to him stood Nico, Piper and Jason, all with their swords drawn. "Sorry we're late," Jason said. "Is this the guy who needs killing?" Chapter 76. Hazel. Hazel almost felt sorry for Clytius. They attacked him from every direction, Leo shooting fire at his legs, Frank and Piper jabbing at his chest, Jason flying into the air and kicking him in the face. Hazel was proud to see how well Piper remembered her sword-fighting lessons. Each time the giant's smoky veil started creeping around one of them, Nico was there, slashing through it, drinking in the darkness with his Stygian blade. Percy and Annabeth were on their feet, looking weak and dazed, but their swords were drawn. When did Annabeth get a sword? And what was it made of? Ivory? They looked like they wanted to help, but there was no need. The giant was surrounded. Clytius snarled, turning back and forth, as if he couldn't decide which of them to kill first. Wait! Hold still! No! Ouch! The darkness around him dispelled completely, leaving nothing to protect him except his battered armour. Ichor oozed from a dozen wounds. The damage healed almost as fast as it was inflicted, but Hazel could tell the giant was tiring. One last time Jason flew at him, kicking him in the chest, and the giant's breastplate shattered. Clytius staggered backwards. His sword dropped to the floor. He fell to his knees, and the demigods encircled him. Only then did Hecate step forward, her torches raised. Mist curled around the giant, hissing and bubbling as it touched his skin. And so it ends, Hecate said. It does not end! Clytius' voice echoed from somewhere above, muffled and slurred. My brethren have risen. Gaia waits only for the blood of Olympus. It took all of you together to defeat me. What will you do when the Earth Mother opens her eyes? Hecate turned her torches upside down. She thrust them like daggers at Clytius' head. The giant's hair went up faster than dry tinder, spreading down his head and across his body until the heat of the bonfire made Hazel wince. Clytius fell without a sound, face first into the rubble of Hades' altar. His body crumbled to ashes. For a moment no one spoke. Hazel heard a ragged, painful noise and realised it was her own breathing. Her side felt like it had been kicked in with a battering ram. The goddess Hecate faced her. You should go now, Hazel Levesque. Lead your friends out of this place. Hazel gritted her teeth, trying to hold in her anger. Just like that? No thank you, no good work? The goddess tilted her head. Gale the weasel chittered. Maybe a goodbye, maybe a warning, and disappeared in the folds of her mistress's skirts. You look in the wrong place for gratitude, Hecate said. As for good work, that remains to be seen. Speed your way to Athens. Clytius was not wrong. The giants have risen, all of them, stronger than ever. Gaia is on the very edge of waking. The Feast of Hope will be poorly named unless you arrive to stop her. The chamber rumbled. Another stela crashed to the floor and shattered. The house of Hades is unstable, Hecate said. Leave now. We shall meet again. The goddess dissolved. The mist evaporated. She's friendly, Percy grumbled. The others turned towards him and Annabeth, as if just realising they were there. Dude! Jason gave Percy a bear hug. Back from Tartarus, Leo whooped. That's my peeps. Piper threw her arms around Annabeth and cried. Frank ran to Hazel. He gently folded her arms around her. You're hurt, he said. Ribs probably broken, she admitted. But Frank, what happened to your arm? He managed to smile. Long story. We're alive, that's what matters. She was so giddy with relief, it took her a moment to notice Nico standing by himself, his expression full of pain and conflict. Hey, she called to him, beckoning with her good arm. He hesitated, then came over and kissed her forehead. I'm glad you're okay, he said. The ghosts were right. Only one of us made it to the doors of death. You would have made Dad proud. She smiled, cupping her hand gently to his face. We couldn't have defeated Clytius without you. She brushed her thumb under Nico's eye and wondered if he'd been crying. She wanted so badly to understand what was going on with him, what had happened to him over the last few weeks. After all they'd just been through, Hazel was more grateful than ever to have a brother. Before she could say that, the ceiling shuddered. Cracks appeared in the remaining tiles. Columns of dust spilled down. We've got to get out of here, Jason said. Frank? Frank shook his head. I think one favour from the dead is all I can manage today. Wait, what? Hazel asked. Piper raised her eyebrows. Your unbelievable boyfriend called in a favour as a child of Mars. He summoned the spirits of some dead warriors, made them lead us here, though. Well, I'm not sure, actually. The passages of the dead? All I know is that it was very, very dark. To their left, a section of the wall split. 2 ruby eyes from a carved stone skeleton popped out and rolled across the floor. We'll have to shadow travel, Hazel said. Nico winced. Hazel, I can barely manage that with only myself, with 7 more people. I'll help you. She tried to sound confident. She'd never shadow travelled before, had no idea if she could, but after working with the mist, altering the labyrinth, she had to believe it was possible. An entire section of tiles peeled loose from the ceiling. Everyone, grab hands, Nico yelled. They made a hasty circle. Hazel envisioned the Greek countryside above them. The cavern collapsed, and she felt herself dissolving into shadow. They appeared on the hillside overlooking the river Acheron. The sun was just rising, making the water glitter and the clouds glow orange. The cool morning air smelled of honeysuckle. Hazel was holding hands with Frank on her left, Nico on her right. They were all alive and mostly whole. The sunlight in the trees was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She wanted to live in that moment, free of monsters and gods and evil spirits. Then her friends began to stir. Nico realised that he was holding Percy's hand and quickly let go. Leo staggered backwards. I think I'll sit down. He collapsed. The others joined him. The Argo 2 still floated over the river, a few hundred yards away. Hazel knew that they could signal Coach Hedge and tell him they were alive. Had they been in the temple all night? Or several nights? But at the moment the group was too tired to do anything except sit and relax, and marvel at the fact that they were okay. They began to exchange stories. Frank explained what had happened with the ghostly legion and the army of monsters, how Nico had used the scepter of Diocletian, and how bravely Jason and Piper had fought. Frank is being modest, Jason said. He controlled the entire legion. You should have seen him. Oh, by the way, Jason glanced at Percy. I resigned my office, gave Frank a field promotion to Praetor, unless you want to contest that ruling. Percy grinned. No argument here. Praetor? Hazel stared at Frank. He shrugged uncomfortably. Well, yeah, I know it seems weird. She tried to throw her arms around him, and then winced as she remembered her bruised ribs. Busted, potentially. She settled for kissing him. It seems perfect. Leo clapped Frank on the shoulder. Way to go, Zhang. Now you can order Octavian to fall on his sword. Tempting, Frank agreed. He turned apprehensively to Percy. But you guys, Tartarus has to be the real story. What happened down there? How did you... Percy laced his fingers through Annabeth's. Hazel happened to glance at Nico and saw the pain in his eyes. She wasn't sure, but maybe he was thinking how lucky Percy and Annabeth were to have each other. Nico had gone through Tartarus alone. We'll tell you the story, Percy promised. But not yet, okay? I'm not ready to remember that place. No, Annabeth agreed. Right now. She gazed towards the river and faltered. I think our ride is coming. Hazel turned. The Argo 2 veered to port, its aerial oars in motion, its sails catching the wind. Festus's head glinted in the sunlight. Even from a distance, Hazel could hear him creaking and clanking in jubilation. That's my boy, Leo yelled. As the ship got closer, Hazel saw Coach Hedge standing at the prow. About time, the coach yelled down. He was doing his best to scowl, but his eyes gleamed as if maybe, just maybe, he was happy to see them. What took you so long, Cupcakes? You kept your visitor waiting. Visitor? Hazel murmured. At the rail next to Coach Hedge, a dark-haired girl appeared, wearing a purple cloak, her face so covered with soot and bloody scratches that Hazel almost didn't recognise her. Raina had arrived. Chapter 77. Percy. Percy stared at the Athena Parthenos, waiting for it to strike him down. Leo's new mechanical hoist system had lowered the statue onto the hillside with surprising ease. Now the 40-foot-tall goddess gazed serenely over the river Acheron, her gold dress like molten metal in the sun. Incredible, Raina admitted. She was still red-eyed from crying. Soon after she'd landed on the Argo 2, her Pegasus, Scipio, had collapsed, overwhelmed by poisoned claw marks from a griffin attack the night before. Raina had put the horse out of his misery with her golden knife, turning the Pegasus into dust that scattered in the sweet-smelling Greek air. Maybe not a bad end for a flying horse, but Raina had lost a loyal friend. Percy figured that she'd given up too much in her life already. The Praetor circled the Athena Parthenos warily. It looks newly made. Yeah, Leo said. We brushed off the cobwebs and a little Windex. It wasn't hard. The Argo 2 hovered just overhead. With Festus keeping watch for threats on the radar, the entire crew had decided to eat lunch on the hillside while they discussed what to do. After the last few weeks, Percy figured they'd earned a good meal together. Really anything that wasn't firewater or Dracon meat soup. Hey, Raina, Annabeth called. Have some food. Join us. The Praetor glanced over, her dark eyebrows furrowed, as if join us didn't quite compute. Percy had never seen Raina without her armour before. It was on board the ship, being repaired by Buford the Wonder Table. She wore a pair of jeans and a purple Camp Jupiter t-shirt and looked almost like a normal teenager, except for the knife at her belt and that guarded expression, like she was ready for an attack from any direction. All right, she said finally. They scooted over to make room for her in the circle. She sat cross-legged next to Annabeth, picked up a cheese sandwich and nibbled at the edge. So, Raina said, Frank Zhang, praetor. Frank shifted, wiping crumbs from his chin. Well, yeah, a field promotion. To lead a different legion, Rayner noted. A legion of ghosts. Hazel put her arm protectively through Frank's. After an hour in sickbay, they both looked a lot better, but Percy could tell they weren't sure what to think about their old boss from Camp Jupiter dropping in for lunch. Rayner, Jason said. You should have seen him. He was amazing, Piper agreed. Frank is a leader, Hazel insisted. He makes a great praetor. Rayner's eyes stayed on Frank, like she was trying to guess his weight. I believe you, she said. I approve. Frank blinked. You do? Rayner smiled dryly. A son of Mars, the hero who helped to bring back the Eagle of the Legion. I can work with a demigod like that. I'm just wondering how to convince the 12th Fulminata. Frank scowled. Yeah, I've been wondering the same thing. Percy still couldn't get over how much Frank had changed. A growth spurt was putting it mildly. He was at least 3 inches taller, less pudgy and more bulky like a linebacker. His face looked sturdier, his jawline more rugged. It was as if Frank had turned into a bull and then back to human, but he'd kept some of the bullishness. The Legion will listen to you, Rayner, Frank said. You made it here alone, across the ancient lands. Rayner chewed her sandwich as if it were cardboard. In doing so, I broke the laws of the Legion. Caesar broke the law when he crossed the Rubicon, Frank said. Great leaders have to think outside the box sometimes. She shook her head. I'm not Caesar. After finding Jason's note in Diocletian's palace, tracking you down was easy. I only did what I thought was necessary. Percy couldn't help smiling. Rayner, you're too modest. Flying halfway across the world by yourself to answer Annabeth's plea because you knew it was our best chance for peace. That's pretty freaking heroic. Rayner shrugged. Says the demigod who fell into Tartarus and found his way back. He had help, Annabeth said. Oh, obviously, Rayner said. Without you, I doubt Percy could find his way out of a paper bag. True, Annabeth agreed. Hey, Percy complained. The others started laughing, but Percy didn't mind. It felt good to see them smile. Heck, just being in the mortal world felt good, breathing unpoisonous air, enjoying actual sunshine on his back. Suddenly he thought of Bob. Tell the sun and stars hello for me. Percy's smile melted. Bob and Damison had sacrificed their lives so that Percy and Annabeth could sit here now, enjoying the sunlight and laughing with their friends. It wasn't fair. Leo pulled a tiny screwdriver from his tool belt. He stabbed a chocolate-covered strawberry and passed it to Coach Hedge. Then he pulled out another screwdriver and speared a second strawberry for himself. So, the 20 million peso question, Leo said. We got this slightly used 40-foot-tall statue of Athena. What do we do with it? Rayner squinted at the Athena Parthenos. As fine as it looks on this hill, I didn't come all this way to admire it. According to Annabeth, it must be returned to Camp Half-Blood by a Roman leader. Do I understand correctly? Annabeth nodded. I had a dream down in, Tartarus. I was on Half-Blood Hill, and Athena's voice said, I must stand here. The Roman must bring me. Percy studied the statue uneasily. He'd never had the best relationship with Annabeth's mum. He kept expecting Big Mama's statue to come alive and chew him out for getting her daughter into so much trouble, or maybe just step on him without a word. It makes sense, Nico said. Percy flinched. It almost sounded like Nico had read his mind and was agreeing that Athena could step on him. The son of Hades sat on the other end of the circle, eating nothing but half a pomegranate, the fruit of the underworld. Percy wondered if that was Nico's idea of a joke. The statue is a powerful symbol, Nico said. A Roman returning it to the Greeks? That could heal the historic rift, maybe even heal the gods of their split personalities. Coach Hedge swallowed his strawberry, along with half the screwdriver. Now, hold on. I like peace as much as the next satyr. You hate peace, Leo said. The point is, Valdez, we're only, a few days from Athens? We've got an army of giants waiting for us there. We went to all the trouble of saving the statue. I went to most of the trouble, Annabeth reminded him, because that prophecy called it the giant's bane. The coach continued. So why aren't we taking it to Athens with us? It's obviously our secret weapon. He eyed the Athena Parthenos. It looks like a ballistic missile to me. Maybe if Valdez straps some engines to it. Piper cleared her throat. Great idea, Coach, but a lot of us have had dreams and visions of Gaia rising at Camp Half-Blood. She unsheathed her dagger Catoptris and set it on her plate. At the moment, the blade showed nothing except sky, but looking at it still made Percy uncomfortable. Since we got back to the ship, Piper said, I've been seeing some bad stuff in the knife. The Roman Legion is almost within striking distance of Camp Half-Blood. They're gathering reinforcements, spirits, eagles, wolves. Octavian, Rayner growled. I told him to wait. When we take over command, Frank suggested, our first order of business should be to load Octavian into the nearest catapult and fire him as far away as possible. Agreed, Rayner said. But for now, he's intent on war, Annabeth put in. He'll have it unless we stop him. Piper turned the blade of her knife. Unfortunately, that's not the worst of it. I saw images of a possible future, the camp in flames, Roman and Greek demigods lying dead, and Gaia. Her voice failed her. Percy remembered the god Tartarus in physical form, looming over him. He'd never felt such helplessness and terror. He still burned with shame, remembering how his sword had slipped out of his hand. You might as well try to kill the earth, Tartarus had said. If Gaia was that powerful, and she had an army of giants at her side, Percy didn't see how its 7 demigods could stop her, especially when most of the gods were incapacitated. They had to stop the giants before Gaia woke, or it was game over. If the Athena Parthenos was a secret weapon, taking it to Athens was pretty tempting. Heck, Percy kind of liked the idea of coaches of using it as a missile and sending Gaia up in a godly nuclear mushroom cloud. Unfortunately, his gut told him that Annabeth was right. The statue belonged back on Long Island, where it might be able to stop the war between the two camps. So, Rayner takes the statue, Percy said, and we continue on to Athens. Leo shrugged. Cool with me, but a few pesky logistical problems. We got, 2 weeks until that Roman feast day when Gaia is supposed to rise? The Feast of Spes, Jason said. That's on the 1st of August. Today is July 18th, Frank offered. So yeah, from tomorrow, exactly 14 days. Hazel winced. It took us 18 days to get from Rome to here, a trip that should have only taken 2 or 3 days max. So, given our usual luck, Leo said, maybe we have enough time to get the Argo 2 to Athens, find the giants and stop them from waking Gaia. Maybe. But how is Rayner supposed to get this massive statue back to Camp Half-Blood before the Greeks and Romans put each other through the blender? She doesn't even have her Pegasus anymore. Sorry. Fine, Rayner snapped. She might be treating them like allies rather than enemies, but Percy could tell Rayner still had a not so soft spot for Leo, probably because he'd blown up half the forum in New Rome. She took a deep breath. Unfortunately, Leo is correct. I don't see how I can transport something so large. I was hoping you all would have an answer. The labyrinth, Hazel said. I mean, if Pasiphae really has reopened it, and I think she has. She looked at Percy apprehensively. Well, you said the labyrinth could take you anywhere, so maybe. No, Percy and Annabeth spoke in unison. Not to shoot you down, Hazel, Percy said. It's just... He struggled to find the right words. How could he describe the labyrinth to someone who'd never explored it? Daedalus had created it to be a living, growing maze. Over the centuries, it had spread like the roots of a tree under the entire surface of the world. Sure, it could take you anywhere. Distance inside was meaningless. You could enter the maze in New York, walk 10 feet and exit the maze in Los Angeles, but only if you found a reliable way to navigate. Otherwise, the labyrinth would trick you and try to kill you at every turn. When the tunnel network had collapsed after Daedalus died, Percy had been relieved. The idea that the maze was regenerating itself, honeycombing its way under the earth again, and providing a spacious new home for monsters, well, that didn't make him happy. He had enough problems already. For one thing, he said, the passages in the labyrinth were way too small for the Athena Parthenos. There's no chance you could take it down there. And even if the maze is reopening, Annabeth continued, we don't know what it might be like now. It was dangerous enough before, under Daedalus's control, and he wasn't evil. If Pasiphae has remade the labyrinth the way she wanted... She shook her head. Hazel, maybe your underground senses could guide Rayner through, but no one else would stand a chance. And we need you here. Besides, if you got lost down there... You're right, Hazel said glumly. Never mind. Rayner cast her eyes around the group. Other ideas? I could go, Frank offered, not sounding very happy about it. If I'm a praetor, I should go. Maybe we could rig some sort of sled or... No, Frank zang. Rayner gave him a weary smile. I hope we will work side by side in the future, but for now your place is with the crew of this ship. You are one of the 7, of the prophecy. I'm not, Nico said. Everybody stopped eating. Percy stared across the circle at Nico, trying to decide if he was joking. Hazel set down her fork. Nico? I'll go with Rayner, he said. I can transport the statue with shadow travel. Percy raised his hand. I mean, I know you just got all 8 of us to the surface, and that was awesome, but a year ago, you said transporting just yourself was dangerous and unpredictable. A couple of times you ended up in China, transporting a 40-foot statue and 2 people halfway across the world. I've changed since I came back from Tartarus. Nico's eyes glittered with anger, more intensely than Percy understood. He wondered if he'd done something to offend the guy. Nico, Jason intervened. We're not questioning your power. We just want to make sure you don't kill yourself trying. I can do it, he insisted. I'll make short jumps, a few 100 miles each time. It's true, after each jump I won't be in any shape to fend off monsters. I'll need Raina to defend me in the statue. Raina had an excellent poker face. She studied the group, scanning their faces, but betraying none of her own thoughts. Any objections? No one spoke. Very well, she said, with the finality of a judge. If she'd had a gavel, Percy suspected she would have banged it. I see no better option, but there will be many monster attacks. I would feel better taking a third person. That's the optimal number for a quest. Coach Hedge, Frank blurted. Percy stared at him, not sure he'd heard correctly. What, Frank? The coach is the best choice, Frank said. The only choice. He's a good fighter. He's a certified protector. He'll get the job done. A fawn, Raina said. Satyr, barked the coach. And yeah, I'll go. Besides, when you get to Camp Half-Blood, you'll need somebody with connections and diplomatic skills to keep the Greeks from attacking you. Just let me go make a call. Get my baseball bat. He got up and shot Frank an unspoken message that Percy couldn't quite read. Despite the fact that he'd just been volunteered for a likely suicide mission, the coach looked grateful. He jogged off towards the ship's ladder, tapping his hooves together like an excited kid. Nico rose. I should go too, and rest before the first passage. We'll meet at the statue at sunset. Once he was gone, Hazel frowned. He's acting strangely. I'm not sure he's thinking this through. He'll be okay, Jason said. I hope you're right. She passed her hand over the ground. Diamonds broke the surface, a glittering Milky Way of stones. We're at another crossroads. The Athena Parthenos goes west. The Argo II goes east. I hope we chose correctly. Percy wished he could say something encouraging, but he felt unsettled. Despite all they'd been through and all the battles they'd won, they still seemed no closer to defeating Gaia. Sure, they'd released Thanatos. They'd closed the doors of death. At least now they could kill monsters and make them stay in Tartarus for a while. But the giants were back. All the giants. One thing bothers me, he said. If the Feast of Spes is in 2 weeks, and Gaia needs the blood of 2 demigods to wake, why did Clytius call it? What did he call it? The blood of Olympus? Then aren't we doing exactly what Gaia wants? Heading to Athens. If we don't go, and she can't sacrifice any of us, doesn't that mean she can't wake up fully? Annabeth took his hand. He drank in the sight of her now that they were back in the mortal world, without the death mist, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. Even if she was still thin and wan, like him, and her grey eyes were stormy with thought. Percy, prophecies cut both ways, she said. If we don't go, we may lose our best and only chance to stop her. Athens is where our battle lies. We can't avoid it. Besides, trying to thwart prophecies never works. Gaia could capture us somewhere else or spill the blood of some other demigods. Yeah, you're right, Percy said. I don't like it, but you're right. The mood of the group became as gloomy as Tartarus air, until Piper broke the tension. Well, she sheathed her blade and patted her cornucopia. Good picnic. Who wants dessert? Chapter 78. Percy. At sunset, Percy found Nico tying ropes around the pedestal of the Athena Parthenos. Thank you, Percy said. Nico frowned. What for? You promised to lead the others to the house of Hades, Percy said. You did it. Nico tied the ends of the ropes together, making a halter. You got me out of that bronze jar in Rome, saved my life yet again. It was the least I could do. His voice was steely, guarded. Percy wished he could figure out what made this guy tick, but he'd never been able to. Nico was no longer the geeky kid from Westover Hall with the mythomagic cards, nor was he the angry loner who'd followed the ghost of Minos through the labyrinth. But who was he? Also, Percy said, you visited Bob. He told Nico about their trip through Tartarus. He figured if anyone could understand, Nico could. You convinced Bob that I could be trusted, even though I never visited him. I never gave him a second thought. You probably saved our lives by being nice to him. Yeah, well, Nico said, not giving people a second thought, that can be dangerous. Dude, I'm trying to say thank you. Nico laughed without humour. I'm trying to say you don't need to. Now I need to finish this, if you could give me some space. Yeah, okay. Percy stepped back while Nico took up the slack on his ropes. He slipped them over his shoulders as if the Athena Parthenos was a giant backpack. Percy couldn't help feeling a little hurt, being told to take a hike. Then again, Nico had been through a lot. The guy had survived in Tartarus on his own. Percy understood firsthand just how much strength that must have taken. Annabeth walked up the hill to join them. She took Percy's hand, which made him feel better. Good luck, she told Nico. Yeah. He didn't meet her eyes. You too. A minute later, Raina and Coach Hedge arrived in full armour with packs over their shoulders. Raina looked grim and ready for combat. Coach Hedge grinned like he was expecting a surprise party. Rayner gave Annabeth a hug. "We will succeed," she promised. "I know you will," Annabeth said. Coach Hedge shouldered his baseball bat. "Yeah, don't worry. I'm going to get to camp and see my baby. I'm going to get this baby to camp." He patted the leg of the Athena Parthenos. "All right," said Nico. "Grab the ropes, please. Here we go." Rayner and Hedge took hold. The air darkened. The Athena Parthenos collapsed into its own shadow and disappeared, along with its 3 escorts. The Argo II sailed after nightfall. They veered southwest until they reached the coast, then splashed down in the Ionian Sea. Percy was relieved to feel the waves beneath him again. It would have been a shorter trip to Athens over land, but after the crew's experience with mountain spirits in Italy, they decided not to fly over Gaia's territory any more than they had to. They would sail around the Greek mainland, following the routes that Greek heroes had taken in the ancient times. That was fine with Percy. He loved being back in his father's element, with the fresh sea air in his lungs and the salty spray on his arms. He stood at the starboard rail and closed his eyes, sensing the currents beneath them. But images of Tartarus kept burning in his mind. The river Phlegethon, the blistered ground where monsters regenerated, the dark forest where Arise circled overhead in the blood-mist clouds. Most of all, he thought about a hut in the swamp with a warm fire and racks of drying herbs and drakon jerky. He wondered if that hut was empty now. Annabeth pressed next to him at the rail, her warmth reassuring. "I know," she murmured, reading his expression. "I can't get that place out of my head either." "Damison," Percy said. "And Bob. I know." Her voice was fragile. "We have to make their sacrifice worth it. We have to beat Gaia." Percy stared into the night sky. He wished they were looking at it from the beach on Long Island, rather than from halfway around the world, sailing towards almost certain death. He wondered where Nico, Rayner and Hedge were now, and how long it would take them to make it back, assuming they survived. He imagined the Romans drawing up battle lines right now, encircling Camp Half-Blood. 14 days to reach Athens. Then, one way or another, the war would be decided. Over in the bow, Leo whistled happily as he tinkered with Festus's mechanical brain, muttering something about a crystal and an astrolabe. Amidships, Piper and Hazel practiced their swordplay, gold and bronze blades ringing in the night. Jason and Frank stood at the helm, talking in low tones, maybe telling stories of the Legion or sharing thoughts of being praetor. "We've got a good crew," Percy said. "If I have to sail to my death." "You're not dying on me, seaweed brain," Annabeth said. "Remember, never separated again. And after we get home..." "What?" Percy asked. She kissed him. "Ask me again, once we defeat Gaia." He smiled, happy to have something to look forward to. "Whatever you say." As they sailed further from the coast, the sky darkened and more stars came out. Percy studied the constellations, the ones Annabeth had taught him so many years ago. "Bob says hello," he told the stars. The Argo II sailed into the night.